Hi guys, today I'm going to show you how I took this original photo of a Ferrari 488 and turned it into this composite. So let's get started. Okay, so with this tutorial we're actually going to start off working in Lightroom, where we're going to make some basic adjustments to the contrast, the clarity, some of the colors as well. And then we're going to crop the photo a little bit so there's more emphasis on the subject itself. I also wanted just to give a shout out to HM Automotive. He was able to supply me with this original raw photo. This was a collaboration project between him and I. So check out his Instagram. It's HM Automotive. It's full of cool content. So yeah, let's get started with adjusting this image. First and foremost, I'm just gonna crop the image a little bit so I have it the way I had it in the final image. I'm just gonna ballpark it, but I believe I just kind of got rid of all the background clutter there. Okay, let's just say that's close enough. And then we're gonna up this contrast just a little bit as well. We're gonna bring the highlights down all the way. We're gonna up the clarity. So let's say 30. Let's just leave the shadows as is, the blacks as is. We can make further adjustments in Photoshop as well, but these are just kind of more minor ones. And then I'm just gonna tweak the greens and get rid of the blues in this image. So under saturation, I'm just gonna go green and actually blue. Let's just get rid of the blue first. Just bring it down, maybe not all the way, maybe down to 75, something like that. And then with the green, I'm gonna adjust the hue on the green so it's more on the yellowish side. And let's go under luminance. Let's just keep it the way it is. And then saturation. We don't actually have to worry about all this background clutter because we're actually gonna get rid of it anyways in Photoshop. So let's just leave it as is for now. So, and of course, other than that, I would make my lens corrections as well. And then make sure it's set to the right camera settings. This wasn't shot on my camera, so obviously I'm not actually exactly sure which camera it was, but usually Lightroom automatically detects which make and model it is, so we're good with that. The detail, I usually bump it up to about 70 for the sharpening and the noise reduction about 40. And then I feel the red on the car itself is a little bit too, it's got a little bit too magenta in it. So maybe we'll just get rid of the magenta and the purple and then move the red a little bit towards the orange side. So not, obviously not that much, but maybe just maybe like 5. Okay, so I think we're done with this image in Lightroom, and we're gonna bring it into Photoshop and go from there. Okay, so now that we're in Photoshop, I was trying to think of ways to kind of composite this image and get rid of all this clutter in the background. And at first I thought maybe using the clone stamp tool would work, but it would be quite strenuous and it would take a lot of work to get rid of all this stuff. So I just thought to myself, why not just entirely get rid of all this stuff in the background here and then put in a brand new background that sort of matches whatever we have here. So you have like a white brick wall in the background, and then this garage door at the top, it's open, but I thought it'd be cool if I put in my own garage door that's kind of halfway closed. So what I actually did is I went on Google and I just typed in garage door, and I found this cool image here of this garage door here. And the cool thing is that if you go back into this image here, I wasn't a big fan of this sort of the driveway look here, these little stones. So when I found this garage door, I thought, wow, that's kind of cool. It actually came with like a floor with the ground as well. So might as well utilize that. So there's two components that I was able to utilize from this one image alone. So if I turn off this original image layer, I can actually show you guys how I went about sort of cutting out the background clutter and then incorporating the new garage door and the new ground. So let's just turn that off, and I'm gonna turn on that cutout layer of the car. And as you can see, let's go back to the original. The only thing that I really had to do for the actual floor inside the garage is I had to stamp clone tool this little object here out. Everything else was still usable. So if I go back to the cutout image, it's literally the same thing. I just kind of used the dodge tool, the burn tool, to kind of darken up the background, because what's going to happen is I'm going to blend it in with the background behind the car. But as you can see, I didn't even bother kind of cutting out the top, because that's going to be covered by the new garage door. That's going to be closed halfway through. And then as you can see, this is already flattened as one layer, but what I did is so let's just go back to this for a second and just turn this off. For the ground, I literally just, let's just mask this. And then I literally just cut this original ground out here. Let's just erase it with the mask. So let's say it's sort of like that. And then I put in this image here. I had to scale it because it wasn't a fully high-res image. That's okay though, because we're only using a part of it, and we can always sharpen it just a little bit. So as you can see, it was actually quite easy to blend it in because it already had the right sort of perspective on it. The only really thing I had to do is just, I lost some of those shadows underneath those big vases, and I wanted to blend it a little bit. So I went on the mask of the original image, and I started to draw the image back in just slightly. Take the hardness all the way down and just kind of started doing, especially around the vases. Just because they are sitting on the ground, they are casting a bit of a shadow, but... And then I adjusted some further things. I finessed it a little bit, and then I sharpened this image just as well, just because it was a bit lower res as well. So I went on there, sharpen more, and then I did that several times. So if you go back to if I show you guys the image, as you can see, essentially that's what I did. And of course, I further sort of color corrected the bricks as well. So I took out some of those yellow tones out of the bricks, and that's just using the hue and saturation panel as well. So that's how I went about sort of merging the ground with the original image. And then for the garage door itself, so let's just get rid of that garage door. For the garage door itself, again, I brought in the whole image. Let's just disable this mask on this garage door. Oops, I don't know what's going on here. So disable. So as you can see, I brought in the whole image, and then I just sort of started to mask it out, where I sized it obviously so it matches the original size of the original garage door, but I sort of masked it out so it matches perfectly with the original door. And then I applied some curves to the door as well so it better matches the overall environment. So let's just turn that off. Actually, let's turn it back on. Why not? No, let's turn it off for now. Okay, so that's how I went about sort of tackling the ground in this composite and then the garage door. It's all about really finding that right resource that you're looking for. Once you have that, it's pretty easy to implement it seamlessly. So going back to the original image, as I was speaking before, there was a brick wall behind this car. So I wanted to keep it very similar to the original. So what I did is, again, I Googled brick wall, white brick wall, and I found this cool texture here. So then what I did is I brought it in. Let's just go back to the cutout image. I brought it in, but obviously it's way too bright at the moment. So what I did with that is I adjusted the brightness and the contrast of the brick wall, so it's a lot darker. And then what I did is I applied a black shape, and then I gave it sort of like a mask on it, but then a circular mask, so it sort of has this vignette effect in the back, so it kind of fades into this black, but then it still shows the brick wall right behind the car, sort of similar to, a bit similar to the original image. So it still doesn't look quite right, but obviously we're building this image up slowly. Let's just go further. And then what I did is I applied a glow behind the car. So it almost looks like the taillights are on. This doesn't, oops, this original image doesn't have this, but this is what I decided to do just because I wanted to take some creative license with this. I thought that the actual, and the way I did this is I just drew a circular red shape, and then I applied a Gaussian blur to it. And then I put an overlay blend mode to it. As if you can see, if I went to normal, it would just look like this. So if I went back to overlay, that's what happens. And then I applied a hue and saturation effect. So I toned it down just a little bit so it doesn't fight with the car in the forefront. And then if you look back into the original image, because the car you can kind of see through it, I had to cut out the back window, and I sort of applied a black overlay to it, but then I toned down the opacity of it so you can still see right through it. So as you can see, the image is starting to take shape. What I wanted to do next is blend sort of the ground to the background so it's a lot more seamless. Obviously it's missing some components here. It looks obviously unfinished, but what I did with this is, again, if you've seen my previous tutorials, I've used a similar method before, but essentially what I did is I drew a black rectangle, just let's say spanning across the screen like this. And then what I did is, again, I converted it to, I rasterized it, and then I went there under filter and I apply a Gaussian blur to it. Let's just say something like this. Again, these numbers are just whatever I'm using, but whatever composite you're working on, the numbers might vary. So, and then because it is on top of the car, the layer, let's just move it down here. I'm gonna turn this off and I'm just gonna show you guys. Let's scale it this way so it spans across the entire garage door. So it does blend in quite well, but the problem is that obviously it's in front of the car. So you just have to apply a mask to it and then start brushing out the black right where the car is. Let's just position it up a little bit. We're actually going to double up on this layer once I'm finished with the layer mask. So I'm just doing a super rough job, but just to give you guys an idea of what I did. And then I duplicated that layer just so it gives you that much more coverage. Actually, first, I obviously had to delete it from the sides of the garage as well. You can do a much more careful job. I'm just trying to demonstrate the method that I used here. So once I was finished masking it out, I doubled up on that layer. It's still, obviously you would still have to get rid of some of the black here on the car. So once I was finished with that, I just merged those two layers together. And that's how I did it. So if I go back to my original one, as you can see, this is the method that I used to blend the background sort of to the ground. So it's quite seamless. And then let's just turn on the garage door. So as you can see, the image is really starting to take shape now. It looks a lot more natural, but we're going to apply a few more effects to it before we're done. So next up, I wanted to give the subject, the car, a lot more emphasis. So I wanted to darken up the entire background and kind of have a vignette look again with this whole entire image. So what I did there is I applied a curves layer, and if I disable this layer mask that's on it, you can see the entire image is a lot darker, a lot more, there's a lot more contrast to it. So I adjusted some certain properties on here to make it a lot darker, but then I started brushing it out so the car is still the way it was, and it's just the edges that are really darkened up. So if I go back and forth toggling on and off, it kind of gives more focus on the subject itself. Next up, and if you actually go back to one of my tutorials, I kind of showed you guys before how to make these, but I also applied sort of like a fog effect to this image, just to give that, you know, a cool kind of look to it. Gives the more dimension as well. So if you actually go on my channel, you can see that I have a tutorial specific to creating your own kind of fog using the brush tool. So that's what I did here. If I toggle back and forth, and then let's just turn on this curves layer to the garage door just to give it that bit of a darker look. And then I felt that I wanted to have the LED lights and the lights on the car sort of on. Just adds to the overall look and feel of this entire image as well. So if I zoom in on this, what these are essentially are, and this layer is already merged together, but what I did to draw the LED lights is I drew little circles, white circles. Let's just not make that release clipping mask. I'm not sure why that was a clipping mask. I made it a shape, a white shape, circular shape, and then I went into the layer style by double clicking into the layer, and I put an outer glow on it. And I just played around with sort of the look that I wanted to go for. Maybe you give it a bit of a bluish tone to it. And then of course I adjusted the sort of the properties under the outer glow in here. So once I was finished with that, I literally just went in, and again, these are just super rough, but just to give you an idea how I went about doing this, I just kind of duplicated those according to the pattern on here. And then once I had it done on one side, I merged them together, and then I went to transform. I duplicated the layer, I transform, and I flipped them horizontally, and I overlay them over top of this side as well. So let's just get rid of that. So those are the LED lights. And then I added sort of a headlight flare to the front headlights as well. And what I did with this is, again, I went on Google and I just typed in headlight flare, and I found the appropriate sort of resource that I could use. In this case, I think it was something like this. Literally just dragged it in here, and I just changed the blend mode to sort of a screen or lighten. I adjusted the levels on this image as well, so it gives more contrast. And then using the eraser tool, I just kind of erased around the image. Let's just say that. Obviously this is super rough, but you guys kind of get the idea. And I think it was screen maybe. Essentially that's what I did. I'm just going to delete that, but that's what I did to the headlights. And then I also added a my own glow as well. And literally what these are circular white shapes with a heavy Gaussian blur effect to it. And then I turned down the opacity all the way down to 15%. And then I gave it a hard light blend mode. So you can see it adds to the overall look and feel of this image. So one thing that I just noticed now is if you zoom in, you can still sort of see the breakup between the layers. And the reason being for that is that, remember the black sort of rectangle that we applied here? We may have to double up on that again. And just by doubling up, obviously you can start to see that hard transition starts to disappear. Let's just double up on it once. It makes that big of a difference, obviously, to make it look a lot more seamless. Next up, what I did is, because the headlights are on, I wanted to give a bit of that headlight sort of casting on the ground itself. And as you can see, all I did there, again, I drew a simple sort of shape like this in white, and then I went ahead, rasterized the layer. You can actually keep it as a smart object, but I like to rasterize it when I'm doing this. And then I applied oops, should have made it white beforehand. So let's just make it white. And then I applied a Gaussian blur to it again. I applied a layer mask to it. I brushed out the part of it that you normally wouldn't see, like here. And then I toned it down to about, let's just say like 20% or something like that. I duplicated the layer. Let's just turn the original one off for a second. And then I transformed and flipped it horizontally. Let's just say it was like a little bit brighter than that. And I believe I gave it a hard light blend mode. Let's just see. An overlay blend mode. So and then I may have doubled up on that layer just to give it a bit more visibility. But that's essentially how I went about making that sort of casting of the headlights at the bottom there. It's actually at 100% overlay opacity. So I turn it on and turn it off. Again, it's subjective. This isn't something that's necessary, but I just wanted to add it to the photo just to, because I felt like it needed something on the ground. So we're moving along quite nicely here. Next thing is I wanted to add a little bit of a cool factor behind the car. So I decided to add some cool particle effects. And you could either draw these yourself, but for this specific composite, I decided just to go on Google again and just kind of Google particles. And once I found the appropriate image, I scaled the particles, and then I placed them right behind the car layer. And as you can see, if I turn off the levels and the color balance on these particles, and then I make them a normal blend mode, they appear just like this. So what I did is I applied a lighten blend mode to it. And then what I did is I changed the color balance so it more matches the background, which is the red. So if you see here, I went in the midtones towards the red and the yellow. Same thing with the shadows, and same thing. Oh, I didn't do anything on the highlights, but as you can see, that's what I did. And then just because I felt like these particles still didn't have enough contrast, I went in, adjusted the levels on them. So I just dragged this black cursor to the right, and that's what it did. So let's go back to the way it was. So that's how I added the particle effect. Again, it's just something that I found online. Again, you can draw it yourself, but I felt like for the purpose of this composite, I could find something quickly online and just kind of put it into the composite itself, and it worked quite well. So this image is actually almost complete. There's just a few more layers, and then I think we're done, and I'm going to show you the before and after. So another thing I wanted to do is give a little bit more dimension to the image. And so what I wanted to do is in front of the car, in front of the garage door, I wanted to apply some cool light strobes to the car. And again, I went on Google, I just searched light strobes, light flares, whatever you can find that will match the look that you're going for. And what I did is I brought it in, I applied a lighten mode to it. If I go back to normal, as you can see, it's quite ugly, but what I did is, this is probably one image here, and then I duplicated it several times, flipped it around, and once I was done with that, I merged those layers together, like I have it here, and I think there's 3 different same images, just kind of positioned differently. And then again, I changed the blend mode to lighten, and that's about it. So it just adds that little bit more depth to it, so it looks like the particles from the garage are sort of coming out of the garage as well. Last but not least, once I was finished with all the elements on the actual composite, I wanted to color correct the image a little bit further. So I decided to apply a color lookup to the image just to bring out some of those bluish tones. I applied another one to it just to get a little bit more emphasis on the center of the image. Again, this is all very subjective. This is just what I felt like worked with this composite. And then last but not least, I applied a color balance to it. And it made it a little bit more, it gave it a little bit more contrast. So if I go back and forth between the before and after, as you can see, it is quite a substantial difference. I think this looks pretty cool. I hope you guys like it as well. So thanks for watching this video.